today's Atomic Spotlight, we're going to be looking at a vulnerability called HiveNightmare or SeriousSAM. This is a vulnerability that went public in July of last year, July 2021. This vulnerability applies to Windows 10 and Windows 11. It takes advantage of the fact that the access control lists, the ACLs that are set for registry hives found in the Windows System32 config directory, such as the SAM registry hive, have improper ACLs allowing any user to access them. This ends up being somewhat of a non-issue for the functioning registry hives that are found in System32 config, because they are always in use. Like the SAM registry hive is always in use by the operating system as soon as it starts, and by virtue of being in use, they can't be copied off by a non-admin user. But where this vulnerability starts to be an issue is when we have backup copies of the registry hives. So those are ones that are not being in use by the operating system, and those backups get made by default on Windows 10 and Windows 11 as system restore points, which you might be familiar with in working with Windows. They get created automatically during application installs and system updates. So it's common to find these system backups. So now you have a system backup with improper access control lists that allow any user to access them, and they aren't in use, making it possible for a non-administrative user to access the data in them. The problem with a non-administrative user accessing the data is that that data can contain sensitive things such as certificates, keys, and hashes of local user passwords. And that's what we find in the SAM registry hive, SAM standing for the Security Accounts Manager. So if we can exploit this vulnerability to get a copy of the SAM registry hive, we could get those credentials. But in order to get those credentials out of the SAM registry hive, where they are stored encrypted, we need to know the decryption key, and that decryption key is stored in the system registry hive. So in order to exploit this vulnerability to get local password hashes from the SAM database, we'll need to grab a copy of the SAM registry hive and the system registry hive. First, let's take a closer look at where the problem lies with Windows System. This has since been patched by Microsoft, but we've got a vulnerable system here, and the patch that Microsoft provides just fixes the permission issues on the Windows System32 config directory and the files in it, such as the SAM and system registry hives. It doesn't go back and delete any existing volume shadow copies, which is the term used for those backup copies made by restore points of certain drives like the C drive. So that's called a volume shadow copy. So even if patches have been applied, this vulnerability could still be exploited if there are old backups around that still have those improper permissions. So this is why this is still applicable to us today. So let's take a look. We're going to use a program called icals. It's built into Windows, so we have that available. You see in there ACLS, that's for ACL, access control lists, so ACLs, and then IC is integrity control. So we've got the icals program, and we can list out Windows System32 config, where all those registry hives like SAM and System are found. System32 config. The problem lies here, built-in users, the group of built-in users, so the users that have access to this computer have read and execute access. So presumably even myself, the art user, without being in an administrative command prompt, without using my administrative access, I presumably could read anything in this config folder. Like the SAM file, let's look at that. That has the same permission here. So let's go ahead and try to make a copy of that file. We'll just do copy, and we'll try to name it like my SAM. And it says the process cannot access the file because it's being used by another process, that being LSAS, and that's always going to be the case. So at first glance, it seems like, yeah, there are some problems with the access control list, but non-admin users still can't copy it off because it's being used by another process. If you are admin, there are some tools that know or are capable of making a copy of these registry hives while they're in use, such as reg.exe, but that won't work as a non-admin user. On my test system here, I actually have 3 system restore points that have been made in the past. So these volume shadow copies, the restore points are stored as volume shadow copies, are accessible to my user because of this bad permission setting, which was default on Windows 10 and 11 not long ago. So let's go up here and let's tie this all back into MITRE ATT&CK. So we'll look for, let's see, does it say something about the SAM? I'm using the Attack Powered Suite plugin here to search through MITRE very easily. I don't want to look at software. Let's see what techniques I have, or data sources or groups. Let's see. So here we have T1003 Security Accounts Manager. I'm going to click go to that in MITRE ATT&CK, and that brings it up and says adversaries may try to get credentials by reading them from the Security Accounts Manager, and there's a variety of ways to do that, most of which have been implemented as attack emulations in the Atomic Red Team library of scripted cyber attacks. So today we're going to use that Atomic Red Team library along with a PowerShell execution framework that knows how to read that library and execute it. I already have that installed, so here we're going to say invoke atomic test, and we use that technique number from MITRE, which was T1003, subtechnique number 2, and we'll just say show details brief because we want to know what scripted cyber attacks have been added to Atomic Red Team under this technique number. And we see several ways to get credentials from the registry or from the Security Accounts Manager database. The 2 that we're interested today are Test 5 and Test 6, getting a copy of the hives from the volume shadow copy. So those system restore points that exist on disks that aren't in use and don't have proper permissions. So let's start with test number 5 and take a closer look. We'll say show details without the brief, and that'll show us all the details of this test. So here we have a description that says dumps volume shadow copies, hives from a volume shadow copy using certutil. Certutil is intended to be a certificate tool that's installed by default on Windows, but it can do other things and tends to be abused by hackers because it's a built-in live off the land binary. So in order to execute this command, what it's doing here, here we have some a version of the command with some configurable arguments, like a limit to how many volume shadow copies we want to search through, and then we get to specify which hive we want to copy, so that could be SAM or system or both. And then it's going to save it into the temp directory in a file called, if we're saving the SAM, it would be SAM VSS, and then %A refers to this number that we're looping through. So we're looping through the numbers 1 to our limit, which is 10 by default, by 1. So every number up until 10, that'll be replaced in here %A. So the first time through, %A is 1, next time it's 2. And we'll see that when we run it. This second line here, command with inputs, is just these same commands but with all of the red variables filled in. So here we see a default value for the limit of 10, but as we run this we can ask it to change these default values, and it's going to use certutil or certain arguments to copy some data from a volume shadow copy. It's going to iterate through shadow copies 1 through 10, and then it's going to look in the Windows System32 config SAM. So that's the copy of the SAM file that's in the volume shadow copy. Okay, so just to prove this out, we're going to list out the files in the temp directory. Let's start with S just to see if we already have anything in there, and we do, so we want to remove those just because we want to prove out what we're doing for the atomic spotlight here. So we're going to erase system star here, list those out. Okay, we don't have any VSS Hive backups now, so we can clear this out. I'm going to turn off the picture of me in the corner because there's something that's going to pop up from Windows Defender that I want you to be able to see. So I'll turn off my camera for a bit. And now we're going to run this test. Right now I'm just showing the details again. So when we run this test, it's going to run this command for us. So let's go ahead and run it. We just need to take off the show details, and I'll run this test number 5, making a copy of the SAM in the temp directory for us. So here we go. We get a threat pop-up. We see it made 3 files, SAM VSS 1, 2, and 3, and then PowerShell goes away. And that's because Windows Defender has killed the process, because it sees that as a parent of this thing that just tried to make a copy of the SAM from using certutil from a volume shadow copy, and it didn't like that, so it killed it. But it still made the file, so it looks like it actually still worked, even though Defender wasn't happy about it. So if we go into our virus and threats settings and we look at our threat history, we see that something was detected. It doesn't have a very helpful name, VSSAM.A, and it says it was removed. Let's bring up our web browser and let's search for that name. VSSAM.A. We go to Microsoft Security Intelligence, and it tells us this threat might arrive through Windows escalation of privileges that exist because of over-permissive ACLs, access control lists, on several files. And that would be in the Windows System32 config directory, like the SAM database. Yes, that is exactly what we were trying to exploit, and Windows Defender identified it and said it removed it, but yet it looked like it actually created those files. So let's start PowerShell up. Let's list out the files in our temp directory, and we do see SAM 1, 2, and 3, 3 versions of SAM copied from volume shadow copies 1, 2, and 3, because we have 3 of them on this computer. And it looks like they're valid. We'll confirm that later if they really are, but they have some file length here. So it seems like maybe it happened so fast that Defender wasn't able to shut it down before it happened, and Defender doesn't go back and clean up those files that got created. Okay, that made a copy of the SAM, but now we want to make a copy of the system file, because remember, we need to grab the encryption key out of the system hive in order to decrypt the password hashes that are found in the SAM hive. So I'm going to add in prompt for input arguments here. And so it'll ask us how many volume shadow copies we want to try to loop through. I'll keep the default of 10, so I just press enter. Now, which hive do we want it done? Here I'm going to say system. And it says it made a copy of system VSS 1, 2, and 3, but we don't get a Windows Defenders pop-up. So apparently Windows is particularly sensitive about the SAM being extracted, but is not concerned with the system file. At this point, the attacker would take the copy of the system and the SAM files off of this system onto their own, typically, where they would run a tool like mimikatz, which knows how to get the encryption key out of the system file and then use that to decrypt the credentials in the SAM. We're going to run mimikatz on this same system just to prove it out. So in our command prompt, we're going to go into the mimikatz folder and the x64 version and start mimikatz. And for this, we just need to point to our 2 files, SAM and system VSS1. I've got a copy of that here, so I don't have to type it all. So we'll copy that and we'll paste it in here to here, and again, that went too fast, so I have it again here at the bottom. We see in mimikatz we just say LSA dump : SAM, and we give it the path to the copy of our system and SAM files that we just made. We're actually curious whether the SAM VSS1 is really valid, because Defender didn't like us making a copy of it and said it removed this this malicious code. So when we push enter, we see a lot of stuff come on the screen, and what this is a bunch of password hashes, including the hash for the machine account and any local users. Our current user is the art user, and this is the NTLM hash of the art user password. So in some of my previous atomic spotlights, I showed how we could take these hashes online and put them in an online password cracker and potentially recover the original password if that's in the online crackers database. We could put it on our own cracking tool to try and guess that password. But in fact, in Windows, if you have the password hash, in most cases, that's enough to use as is. We can do something called pass the hash, where we don't even need to know the password. We just say, hey, here's my hash of my password, and Windows is happy to accept that. If you're interested in those other atomic spotlights, you can Google the atomic spotlights by Antisyphon training, and you will find my spotlights. Let's go to the Antisyphon YouTube page. We'll go to playlists, and then under atomic spotlights, we'll view the full playlist. So if you're interested in some more examples of dumping password hashes and then using those hashes or cracking those hashes, you can check out some of these other videos like video 2 and 3, especially these ones with the blue bar on the bottom, because those apply to the MITRE tactic of credential access. So we were able to use certutil to extract the SAM and the system registry hives, and then take those files and pull out the credential information for all the local users and the machine account. There's another test, test number 6, that also does the same thing, making copies of those registry hives, but instead of using certutil, which may be blocked or caught by detections, we could try another technique which just uses .NET to copy the files. So if I say show details on this test, we see that here we're dumping registry hives from a shadow copy using system.io file. So let's see, this is a little loop, looping from 1 to 10, and it's just using system.io file to copy that volume shadow copy to the temp directory the same way. So before we run that, we want to go back to test number 5 and do cleanup, because the cleanup will erase all those VSS backups. We want to get rid of those before we get started. Now if we run ls, we still have the system versions, because that was one where we gave a different argument. So we'll say erase the system backups too. And now we're all clear. We have no registry hive backups. Now we're going to run test number 6, not using certutil. And it's important to try all these variations here. We get another virus pop-up. It's the same alert. It kills PowerShell, but it looked like it created that file still. Let's open PowerShell back up, list out the files in the temp directory, and we do see those files, so it looks like it continues to work. But as defenders, we need to try all these variations, because imagine if you wrote a detection or prevention that blocked the use of certutil in the way that it's being used here, but then the attacker could use this other technique which doesn't use certutil. So that's why the variety of attack emulations is important. Okay, let's run test number 6 again. We'll prompt for input arg so we can tell it we want a copy of the system hive 2. No Windows Defender pop-up on this one either. We'll return back to our mimikatz window and pass in those files again, and here we see the credentials come by again. So we've proven out that both those ways work, even if we do get some notification that it was disliked by Windows Defender. If you like this video, check out the Atomic Red Team library of scripted cyber attacks. It's found on GitHub under the Red Canary Co. company. And all of the atomics are found, the atomics being the scripted cyber attacks, in the atomics folder inside of T number folders, these T numbers being technique numbers directly from MITRE ATT&CK. So this cross references directly with MITRE ATT&CK, where T1003 in this example is the technique number, and then the numbers after the dot are the subtechnique number if it has a subtechnique or if it applies to those scripted cyber attacks. If you want to learn more about all things attack emulation, check out my 2-day class on attack emulation tools from Antisyphon training.